Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight, you are not a hero. You're not a chosen one, a prophet, or even someone history will bother to footnote. You are a cold, unnamed peasant, somewhere in the year 536 AD, which is unfortunate, because this year is broken. The sky has stopped working, the sun is a smudge, the seasons are confused, and your last turnip has gone soft in the root cellar. You don't know it yet, but you've just stepped into the worst year to be alive in all of recorded history. Before your livestock dies of lung rot and your neighbours eat the family dog, do me one small favour. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love knowing who's tuning in from around the world. And if you'd like early access to more historical bedtime stories, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, you'll find the Patreon link in the description. But for now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You wake up one morning and the sun is broken. You wouldn't describe it that way at first. It's still there, technically. A dull, pale disk hanging in a sky that no longer remembers how to be blue. It isn't night, but it's not day either. The light is wrong, faded, heavy, as though someone dragged a dirty curtain across the heavens. You blink and expect it to burn off by mid-morning, the way mist sometimes does. It doesn't. Days pass. The dimness stays. Then weeks. The light never sharpens. The shadows never return. Eventually, you stop expecting warmth and start adjusting to a world where the sun has clearly decided it's done trying. No one tells you what's happened because no one knows. There's no radio broadcast, no official decree, no helpful meteorologist appearing with a concerned expression and a satellite image. What you are living through is the beginning of a massive volcanic eruption, or maybe two, possibly three. Somewhere far from your shivering village, a mountain has exploded. It could be in Iceland, where the sky likes to punish people with lava and freezing fog in the same afternoon. Or it might be in Central America, where a tropical blast can bleed into the stratosphere and strangle the planet from above. Either way, the result is the same. An immense column of ash, sulfur dioxide, and invisible particles has been hurled into the upper atmosphere, where it now floats, global, silent, and apocalyptic. The effects are not immediate fire and fury. That would at least be dramatic. No, this is slower, meaner. The ash doesn't rain down in torrents. It lingers where you can't touch it, in the upper layers of the atmosphere, spreading like an invisible shroud. It reflects sunlight, diffuses heat, chokes the Earth's lungs without ever setting foot on the ground. What you get is a world stuck in twilight, all day, every day. The trees don't know when to bloom. The birds stop singing. And every morning, you rise to a sky that looks like it's still thinking about whether to bother being alive today. The darkness isn't full, it's worse. It's that half-light that tricks your eyes into straining for detail that isn't there. A grey so consistent and flat that even noon feels like dusk, and dusk feels like morning. You start to forget what colours are supposed to look like. Green turns to ash, brown turns to grey. Faces grow hollow in the strange light, as if everyone is gradually fading out. Children ask why the sun is sick. Elders offer folk wisdom that sounds less comforting each day. You go to bed with the nagging sense that something has gone terribly wrong and that it won't be fixed anytime soon. You keep waiting for it to clear. That's the worst part at first, the waiting. You still think this is a bad spell of weather, maybe a long winter, a strange season, a curse if you're dramatic. You don't yet understand that this isn't passing through. This is settling in. The grey skies are not a storm. They are the new default. There are no more warm months coming. This is not a freakish few weeks of poor visibility. This is a shift in the planet's climate. And you, unlucky soul that you are, happen to be alive right when it hits. This isn't just your village either. News travels slowly, assuming anyone is healthy enough to travel. But what little you do here is worse than you'd hoped. The sun is dim in Gaul. The air is cold in Constantinople. There are rumours from China of yellow fog and failed harvests. A Syrian chronicler writes that the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon. Even the emperors are confused. Even the monks are nervous. No one has a name for what this is. No one has a plan. You're all just living through it together, which is not nearly as reassuring as it sounds. Over the coming months, the light will stay strange, the air will stay cold, the weather will betray you in quiet, calculated ways. Snow will fall in summer, frost will creep into spring. The seasons will lose their shape, as though time itself is trying to shrug off structure. Some days will feel like winter, others will feel like nothing at all. Just a blank grey smear, a placeholder for a day that never really happened. And through it all, you will keep looking up, hoping for the return of the sun. And it will keep disappointing you. You'll hear people start to call this a bad year, which is the kind of understatement only the truly doomed can muster. But the truth is far bleaker. This is not a single year gone sour. This is the beginning of something larger, a decade of collapse, a slow, grinding undoing of everything that once held the world together. Famine, plague, war, cold, and you, poor thing, are going to try and live through it, without warmth, without answers, and eventually without much hope. Welcome to 536, the year the sky went out, and it's only just beginning. You think you've survived hard winters before, and maybe you have, in the way someone might survive a fever, barely, and only by accident. You've dealt with frostbitten fingers, frozen wells, hungry nights. You've patched holes in the thatch and eaten meals that were mostly bark and excuses. You've known what it is to be cold, to be poor, to worry. But this is different. You don't know it yet, not really, but nothing you've learned is going to help you. This winter is not a challenge to be endured. It's a slow dismantling of your life, and you are absurdly unprepared. You're no king, no scholar, no saint praying in a stone tower with stores of wine and honey and clean sheets. You are a generic peasant, indistinguishable from the dozens of other smoke-stained, wind-chapped humans stumbling through the mud outside your village. You own a hut, a few goats, a couple of chickens, assuming they haven't frozen to death yet. You have a wife who mutters in her sleep, a child with a persistent cough, and a back that aches whether you're working or not. Your job, your entire existence, revolves around keeping the people in your hut alive until spring. That's all. That's everything. And you've done it before, just not like this. Because in a normal year, if such a thing even exists, the winters are cruel but predictable. The first frost comes late enough that you've had time to harvest. You know how many sacks of grain you need to get through until planting. You know that if you ration carefully, if you mend the holes in the cloaks and store the root vegetables in the driest corner of the cellar, you'll probably make it. Maybe there will be lean weeks. Maybe you'll have to trade a goat for some lentils. Maybe the thatch will cave in and you'll curse your ancestors, but you'll survive. You've done it before, but that's when the rules worked. That's when the weather followed some kind of logic. Now it's different. The harvest didn't come. The ground was too cold for too long. The barley shriveled before it ripened. The beans moulded. The potatoes, if you even managed to grow any, froze in the soil before you could dig them out. Your cellar is nearly empty before the real cold even starts. The food stores that were supposed to last until March are already down to a few jars of something you're pretending is stew. The meat has long since run out, and the chickens are more useful for eggs than for eating, if they're still laying at all. You were supposed to make it to spring, but spring, it turns out, may not be coming back. Worse still, everything you knew about farming, everything passed down to you by your father and his father before him, has stopped working. When do you plant? When the frost lifts, but it hasn't. When does the sun start to warm the soil? Usually by now, but it doesn't. When will the rains come? They already did at the wrong time in the wrong way, and all they brought was rot. Your calendar is useless. Your instincts are confused. The world isn't broken in a dramatic biblical way. It's broken in a petty, precise way, where everything is just slightly off, just wrong enough to ruin the work, without making it obvious who to blame. You watch the sky for signs. You poke at the soil, sniff the wind, talk to the elders. They give you the same look you give your son when he asks why he can't eat twice in one day. A look that pretends there's an answer, even when there isn't. The rhythms of nature have stopped being rhythmic. The patterns are gone. You try to tell yourself that you just need to hold on a little longer, that surely by next month the sun will return, the days will stretch, and the green shoots will push through. You still believe in the idea of next month. That's how far gone you are. Meanwhile, the cold creeps in with that specific kind of indifference only nature can muster. It doesn't howl, it seeps. Your breath fogs the air inside your home. The walls grow damp. The roof sags under frost that never fully melts. You light fires and huddle and cough, and all the while the cold remains. It is not here to teach you something. It is not here to make you stronger. It is just here, always, unmoved by prayer, effort, or optimism. And through it all you keep planning, because that's what survival looks like at first. You scrape together what's left of your grain. You mend your tools. You draw lines in the dirt for rows you'll never plant. You are working desperately toward a future that has already stopped arriving, and still, some part of you clings to the idea that if you just work harder, if you just endure a little more, things will return to normal. But they won't. Not next month, not next year, not for a very long time. And you, small and hopeful and exhausted, are not ready. The barley never sprouts. The beans rot in place. The cold doesn't scream. It whispers into the soil, into the roots, into your bones, until everything goes still. And for a long time, you don't even realize the crops are dead. That's the trick of it. They don't explode or turn black overnight. They just stop trying. You walk the fields each morning with your calloused hands behind your back, inspecting rows that should be green by now. They aren't. You kneel, dig a little with your fingers, hoping to find promise in the dirt. What you find is mud. What you find is silence. The sun's failure isn't dramatic. It's boring. It shines just enough to keep you hoping, and never enough to help anything grow. Crops need warmth, but they also need timing. They need reliable cues, day length, soil temperature, the sort of invisible signals the world used to send out like clockwork. But now, those signals are scrambled. The cold shows up at the wrong time. The rains fall in the wrong places. A frost hits in late spring, then again in early summer, then again in what was supposed to be autumn. And so the seedlings, if they even bother pushing through the dirt, wither at the stalk. Their leaves too small, too pale, too weak. You try anyway. Of course you do. You replant, you adjust, you beg the earth to play fair. You even try switching crops, planting hardy legumes, root vegetables, anything that might survive on scraps of sun and pure desperation. But the results are always the same. The beans turn to mush before the pods form. The barley lies flat like it's ashamed to be seen. The cabbages split, then collapse into brown, slimy heaps that reek of vinegar and disappointment. Nothing wants to grow. And worse, some things do grow, but not the right things. Mold, for example, grows spectacularly. Mildew, fungus, rust, things that don't feed you, but still love damp and darkness. They thrive where your crops fail. They coat the undersides of leaves and creep across the soil like the plague in slow motion. You wake one morning to a fine white fuzz blanketing your last patch of green. By evening, it's gone yellow and sour. The plants fall apart in your hands when you touch them. Soft, hollowed out, ruined from the inside. You've fed the soil with effort, but it gives you nothing back but rot. In a modern world, you'd shrug, curse, and drive to the store. Maybe grab some canned beans, some instant noodles, a frozen lasagna. But this is 5:36, and the nearest store is your neighbour's garden, and it's dead too. You have no backup plan, no freezer, no shelf-stable fallback. Your pantry is the ground, and the ground is failing you. You start to resent it. You curse the land that raised you. The tools you used to trust, the sky above that refuses to answer. And beneath that resentment, fear begins to spread. Not all at once, but like damp in a wall. You try to ignore it, but it's there. Soon people begin whispering about blight, about curses, about signs. They say someone offended the gods. They say the soil is poisoned. They say it's the end of days. You don't have the luxury of philosophy, so you don't care much why it's happening, only that it is. You start rationing the food you do have, cutting meals in half. Then again, you save the best scraps for your child. You eat the parts of the plants you'd normally discard, stalks, stems, fibrous roots that taste like rope and grief. When you're desperate enough, everything becomes soup. And still, you walk the fields. You do it every day, even though you know the answer. You check the rows as though something might have changed, as though one miracle shoot might have broken through in the night. But you already know how this story ends. Crops die quietly. They don't scream for help. They just stop. And if you're not paying attention, you won't even notice the moment when hope curdled into surrender. You start lying to yourself, gently at first. Maybe the weather will shift. Maybe this one patch of rye will make it. Maybe if you dig a little deeper, you'll find seeds untouched by frost. But it's not true. Deep down, you know it's not true. There is no sunlight coming to rescue your crops. There is no sudden thaw that will make this season normal again. The earth has closed its mouth, and you're not getting fed. Soon the fields are no longer places of labour. They're places of mourning. You walk through them like a priest through a graveyard, murmuring over what used to be life. The tools sit rusting in the shed. The watering pot is dry. The last time you saw a green leaf, you didn't know it would be the last, but you remember it now, vividly, like a dream you didn't know to hold on to. And now, all that's left is wet dirt, collapsed stalks, and the creeping certainty that next season won't be any better. Because the problem isn't the seed, the problem is everything. You can't eat air, you can't burn fog, and that's all the world seems to offer now. Fog, air, and the creeping damp that seeps into everything you own, everything you wear, and everything you once hoped would keep you alive. The walls of your hut sweat even when it doesn't rain. The ground squelches underfoot, no matter how many days pass without a storm. The hay you stuffed into your mattress smells sweet for a day or two, then turns musty and brown. You try to air it out, but there's no dry air left. The whole world is damp, soft and sour, like old teeth left too long in a mouth that's forgotten how to chew. There's a permanent smell now. You can't name it, not precisely. It's not just one thing, it's everything. Decaying, spoiling, dissolving, mould blooming in the corners of rooms, grain gone soft in the sacks you trusted, a sourness in the meat even after you boil it. It's the scent of a world left out in the rain and forgotten. Sometimes it smells like wet wool, sometimes like spoiled milk, sometimes like something you'd rather not identify. But it's always there, clinging to your clothes, your skin, your breath. You try not to notice, then you try to get used to it, and then you stop noticing entirely, which is somehow worse, and you start to understand what it means for food to betray you. In better years, bad meat was a rare mistake. Now it's the rule. You unwrap a cut of pork and find the edges greying, the fat slick and translucent. You scrape it, trim it, boil it with salt and vinegar. You pretend it tastes fine. It doesn't. But what else can you do? There's no butcher offering alternatives. There's no icebox to save it. The air is too wet to dry anything properly and too warm to freeze it. Everything spoils faster now. Bread, berries, milk, even hope, especially hope. And it isn't just your food rotting. It's your house, your clothes, your body. The straw you use to patch the roof turns black within weeks. The wooden beams grow slick with algae. The mud walls soften in the corners, then sag. You press your shoulder against one to test its strength, and it caves inward, damp to the touch. The floor, once solid underfoot, now squishes if you step too hard. Your boots grow mould before they wear out. Your blankets never dry completely. Even your hair starts to feel wrong, limp, cold, constantly damp, like you've just crawled out of a swamp and forgotten to towel off. Then there's the smell of the village. That too has changed. In normal times it was manageable. A little livestock, a little sweat, some smoke. But now it's something heavier. Human waste piles up where it shouldn't. Latrines overflow, and no one has the strength to dig more. Chamber pots go unemptied. People are too tired, too hungry, too sick. And so the smell spreads, not violently, not all at once, but in slow, steady waves that stick in your nose and coat your tongue. You breathe through your mouth, but it doesn't help. The taste just moves inward. You try not to think about what you're walking through. You stop looking too closely at the puddles near the edge of the village path. You learn which doorways to avoid. The ones where the sick live, or worse, the ones that have gone quiet. You avoid the community well because the bucket smells funny, but you drink from it anyway. What choice do you have? You try boiling the water, but the wood's wet and the fire smokes, and you still end up with a bellyache by morning. It starts small, a rash on your leg, a sore that doesn't heal. Your child's lips crack and bleed. Your neighbour starts vomiting and blames it on bad onions. But no one really knows. The healers offer poultices and muttered prayers, but they don't help much. People talk about winter sickness, like it's a normal thing. But you know this isn't normal. There are too many stomach aches, too many fevers, too many people limping around with swollen joints and sunken cheeks. Malnutrition, though no one knows the word for it, begins to do its slow work. The children shrink. The old don't get back up when they lie down. You try to keep things clean. You wash in the stream when it's not frozen, even though it stings. You scrub your hands with cold ash. You sweep the floor with a stick and some misplaced optimism. But you're not stopping anything. Hygiene, as it turns out, requires more than good intentions. It requires fuel for hot water, time to rest, bandages, soap. And you have none of those things. Just cold and damp, and the slow descent into filth. You begin to realise this isn't just about the cold. Cold you could handle. Cold was predictable, but this is different. This is the collapse of all the small things that used to keep life bearable. The smell of fresh bread, the warmth of dry clothes, the comfort of knowing that your dinner won't make you sick. Instead, you wake each morning to damp air, spoiled food, and a growing ache in your gut. You live in a house that smells like wet ashes and bad decisions. You walk streets that stink of slow ruin, and you pretend not to notice, because if you really stopped to take it all in, you'd never sleep again. It's early February, and your child hasn't spoken all day. Not because they're sleeping or sulking, but because it takes too much energy. Their cheeks are sunken, their eyes unfocused, and they've started sitting strangely still, like they're trying not to burn calories by blinking. Your wife hasn't bled in months. You've been eating bark and boiled leather for days, and now you're looking at the seed grain, that last sack hidden in the darkest corner of the cellar, the one thing that isn't meant to be food. It's supposed to be sacred, the future, the next harvest. But you're not thinking about spring anymore. You're thinking about tomorrow, and whether your family will see it. It isn't a conversation. It's not as if everyone sits down and agrees on it. There's no council meeting, no family vote. It happens slowly, with more silence than words. One morning, your wife pulls a handful of the seed from the jar and says nothing. That night, it's in the pot, and you eat it, and then you lie awake wondering if you'll be able to pretend it never happened. The next day, it happens again. After a while, you stop calling it seed grain and start calling it what's left. You still feel guilty, but it's a dull guilt now, the kind that only bothers to whisper. The fights get quieter too, not shouting matches, just friction. Glances across the fire, muttered suggestions that perhaps the grain should be saved for planting. But the suggestion always comes from the one who didn't skip a meal that day, the one whose stomach isn't groaning like a dying cow. It's hard to argue about long-term planning with someone whose child just fainted trying to carry a bucket of water. It becomes impossible to care about spring when winter refuses to end. You try to stretch what little food you have with whatever you can find. Bark, boiled and scraped and ground into something resembling flour. The bread it makes is sour and dense and barely edible, but it's warm, and that counts for something. Sometimes you mix it with lichen, sometimes with straw. The trick is not to taste it too long. There's soup too, if you're generous with the definition. You fill a pot with water, drop in a bit of salt, maybe a piece of leather if it's soft enough to chew. You tell the children it's stew. They don't ask questions anymore. Once in a while, you find meat, though no one wants to know where it came from. A bird that froze mid-flight. A rat too slow to scurry. Something your cousin brought back wrapped in cloth and didn't explain. You cook it anyway. You burn it black over a smoky fire and chew around the bones. It smells like wet hair and old coins. No one complains. Complaining takes energy you no longer have. It isn't food, really. It's time. Time in your belly instead of on the clock. And you're not alone. Rumours pass through the village like wind. Stories of other towns, other families, other people doing the same or worse. Someone's been boiling animal hides for broth. Someone else is grinding acorns into paste, even though they know it makes the children sick. You hear of a man who ate his shoe, and then the rest of his boots. You hear of people chewing cloth. You don't know if it's true. You don't want to find out. You're already eyeing your own belt. History calls these famine foods, things eaten not because they're nourishing, but because they're possible. Birch bark, cattail roots, moss scraped off stones, things that fill space and pretend to be sustenance. You once read about locusts in the Bible and thought it was metaphor. Now you wonder what they taste like. You used to feed scraps to the pigs. Now there are no pigs, only scraps, and you still fight over those. The worst part is how quickly it becomes normal. At first, each strange meal feels like an emergency. Then it becomes a routine. You stop remembering what real food tastes like. You stop dreaming of meat. You stop noticing that your skin is thinner, that your cheeks have hollowed out. Everyone around you is shrinking, slowly. Some days it feels like the whole village is turning transparent. You know you're weaker. You know you're dizzy more often. You know your hands tremble, but so do everyone else's, and that makes it easier to pretend you're fine. You still hide a little seed grain, of course. Just a bit. A desperate token of optimism, stuffed in a jar behind the firewood. You tell yourself you'll plant it in spring, if spring comes, if the frost ever lifts, if your hands are still steady enough to dig. But you know, deep down, that it won't be enough. You've eaten the future to survive the present. You had no choice, and yet the shame clings to your ribs, like the taste of that last miserable bowl of bark and salt. March arrives, but you wouldn't know it by looking up. There's no shift in the light, no early warmth creeping into the soil. The birds don't return. The snow doesn't melt. It just turns to slush and then freezes again, over and over, until the ground resembles something between leather and ice. You tell yourself this is just a slow start to the season. You repeat it like a prayer, but when April comes and then May, and the sky still looks like someone painted it with wet ash, the truth starts to sink in. The sky's not broken in the temporary way. It is broken in the way that doesn't plan to fix itself. The light you live under now is not proper daylight, it's something else, something thin and wrong, a pale smear that seeps through the clouds without illuminating anything. You can still see the sun sometimes when the clouds part just enough to reveal a dim circle, but even that is off, smaller than it should be, like the moon, only bleached and hazy, as if it's being seen through smoked glass. It doesn't rise in glory, or set in splendour. It appears, it lingers, it fades. You stop noticing what time it is because the sky looks the same, whether it's morning or noon or dusk. What you're experiencing, though no one in your village knows the words for it, is a global veil of volcanic aerosols. High above your head, invisible particles of sulfur dioxide and ash have been blasted into the stratosphere by eruptions no one in your country ever saw. They spread in all directions, forming a thin film that encircles the planet and reflects sunlight back into space. The heat never makes it down to you. The light arrives, but stripped of power. It's like trying to grow crops under a funeral shroud, and it's not going away. This haze won't settle. It won't rain down. It will simply remain for months, even years, thinning so slowly that no one alive will remember what the sky used to look like until it's far too late. People begin to murmur about omens, the way the sun glows faintly red at midday, the way the moon disappears entirely on clouded nights. Some say it's a punishment, others say it's a sign. Either way, it unnerves everyone. Even the elders look uncomfortable when they glance up. They stop telling stories about the seasons. They stop promising that spring will come. You see fewer people outside, fewer conversations at the well. Even the dogs bark less often. It's as if the entire village is holding its breath, waiting for something that should have happened by now, but didn't. Religious panic starts to simmer. A few people begin fasting. Others start whispering that someone has brought this down upon you all. There are rumours of witches, of cursed fields, of divine wrath. Some say it's the end of days, though no one can agree on whose days or which god is doing the ending. There's a new gloom in church, a desperation in the prayers. People look to the priest, but he only looks up at the sky and frowns like everyone else. When faith meets a sky that won't change, it either collapses or curdles. You're not sure which one's worse. And the longer it lasts, the more it gets into your head. Not just the cold, the light itself, the colourless, sour daylight. It affects your sleep, your appetite, your thoughts. You stop dreaming in bright images. Everything becomes washed out. Even your memories seem duller, like someone's lowered the contrast on your life. Children grow quiet. Couples stop talking. No one laughs anymore. Not because they're sad, necessarily. Just tired. Just dulled. The days stretch long and grey and shapeless, one blending into the next like wet cloth laid over stone. You're not built for this kind of twilight. Your body expects cycles, bright days, dark nights, clear transitions. But now, everything bleeds together. You wake up tired, spend the day tired, go to bed exhausted, and still can't sleep. You're cold in a way that has nothing to do with weather. It's in your chest, your spine, your thoughts. Like something settled into you. Something heavy and grey and endlessly still. It's not death, but it's close. A sort of living numbness that you can't quite shake, no matter how many times you light the fire, or hug your child, or squint up at the miserable grinning corpse of the sun. In the far-off cities, people will eventually try to record this, to write about the year without sun, the dark year, the famine year. Some will blame comets or eclipses or God. Some will get the dates wrong. Some will pretend it was only a bad winter. But none of them will understand what it felt like. To wait for light that never came. To check the sky every morning, only to be disappointed again. To stop measuring time by days or weeks and start measuring it by how many people you've buried since the last time you saw a clear sky. The sky, of course, doesn't care. It does not hear your prayers or mark your losses. It does not shift in response to human misery. It stays grey. It stays cold. It stays there, high above you, empty of comfort, empty of promise. As you wait and wait and wait. You pray for sun. You fast. You flagellate. You slaughter a goat and burn the best cuts on an altar that hasn't seen genuine hope in months. Still, nothing. The sky doesn't shift. The clouds don't part. The ash-grey ceiling above you doesn't flinch, even when the priest cries out loud enough to wake the dead. You've done your part, made offerings, whispered hymns, wept in corners, and yet the world stays broken. At first it feels like a test, then it feels like a punishment. Eventually, it just feels like silence. The belief doesn't die all at once, it fades, grows brittle, twists in strange directions. People start seeing signs in everything. A bird flying east when it should have flown west. A stillborn calf. Frost appearing in the shape of a skull on someone's window. Omens are everywhere now, and no one agrees on what they mean. Some say the sun is sick. Some say the world is ending. Some say God has turned his face away, or that the old gods have returned and are angry at being forgotten. You hear all of it and believe none of it, or maybe you believe a little of everything. When the light goes out, meaning rushes in to fill the vacuum, no matter how cracked the vessel. In your village, religion used to be background noise, something you did on holy days, something your grandmother scolded you about, something that lived in candles and chants and the scent of old incense. Now it's different. Now it's urgent. People gather more often. They chant louder. They kneel longer. Not because they're devout, not really, but because they're scared. And ritual gives fear a shape, something to do with your hands while the sky forgets to shine. Among Christians, the talk grows darker. They speak of revelation, of tribulation, of the trumpet blasts that signal the end. Someone starts reading the book of Joel aloud, again and again, the part about the sun going dark and the moon turning to blood. People nod solemnly, eyes wide. A few cry. The priest doesn't tell them to stop. He just listens, pale and drawn, like he's wondering whether his own vows were strong enough to get God's attention. You see him pacing at night, staring upward with the kind of expression that once meant deep thought, now just means confusion. The old pagans don't handle it any better. Some say the gods are angry at being neglected. Others think the gods are dead. The festivals lose their joy. Sacrifices grow more frantic. Someone digs up an old tradition involving bloodletting and oak leaves. Another suggests burning a sacred tree. You're not sure where the tree came from, or the logic behind the ritual, but at this point, no one questions much. They just want the sun back, and they'll bleed for it if they have to. If nothing else, the pain reminds them they're still alive. The Zoroastrians to the east whisper of cosmic battles, of light losing to darkness, of Ahura Mazda withdrawing his favour. Fire temples burn low, and priests talk in hushed voices about cycles and trials, and the long winter that comes before renewal. But even those who cling to the idea of eventual rebirth don't pretend this isn't a punishment. The world has tilted off its axis, and if it rights itself again, it won't be because humans earned it. It will be because the divine forces fighting above your heads grew bored and wandered off. New cults begin to appear, small desperate things cobbled together from leftover beliefs and raw hunger. A woman in a neighbouring village claims to hear the voice of a sky god no one's ever heard of before. She leads people in chants at dawn, arms raised toward the fog. A boy claims to dream of fire and gives prophecies that mostly involve shouting and shaking. A man demands worship in exchange for a new planting calendar that still doesn't work. People follow them anyway, because doing something, anything, feels better than waiting in silence. You know it's getting worse when people start looking at their neighbours differently. Someone must be to blame. Someone must have sinned too deeply, or failed to sacrifice enough, or looked at the sky with the wrong kind of eyes. Fingers point. Accusations hiss like steam from under a lid. A sick child is blamed for bad weather. A woman who muttered to herself is avoided. You hear talk of curses, of impurity, of cleansing rituals that sound more like punishment than purification. You stay quiet. You avoid attention. That's safer now. You still pray sometimes, quietly. Not because you expect an answer, That illusion has long since cracked. But because the rhythm of it calms your hands, because it's habit, because the words are familiar, you ask for light, for warmth, for mercy. You ask the sky to shift, the cold to break, the soil to yield. And when nothing changes, you simply fold your hands, nod, and try to sleep through another night of unanswered devotion. The gods, if they ever were listening, have gone quiet. Maybe they're busy, maybe they're dead, or maybe they've seen what's coming next and decided to get out while they still could. Your neighbour's child is missing. Nobody asks questions. The family says nothing. The house is quiet. The door stays closed. You walk past it with your eyes forward and your mouth shut, because you've learned by now that asking the wrong thing is just another way to die. Maybe the child wandered off and froze. Maybe the family sent them away to beg for food in another village. Or maybe, and this is the part you don't say out loud, maybe the child was the last thing in that house that could be eaten. It doesn't happen all at once. No one wakes up one day and decides to abandon morality. It's gradual, a slow erosion of boundaries that once seemed fixed. First, it's just hoarding. People stop sharing. Families pretend they have less than they do. Someone buries a sack of grain under their floorboards and lies about it. A widow who used to give away extra bread now closes her shutters and won't answer the door. You don't blame her. You've done the same. You've learned that generosity is a luxury for people who don't plan to survive the winter. Then come the thefts. Small things at first. A chicken gone missing. A wheel of cheese that wasn't where it should be. Then larger things. A goat. A whole store of kindling. A sack of barley. Accusations start flying, but softly, like smoke. No one wants to say anything too loud, in case it's wrong, in case it's right. You sleep with your back to the door now, a knife under the straw. You don't fear wolves. You fear the people who used to lend you salt. The first murder happens quietly. A man is found face down near the edge of the woods. His pockets are empty. His boots are gone. You hear that he was carrying a dried fish home from his sister's farm. No one finds the fish. No one finds the sister. The priest says a few words and people nod, but no one really grieves. Grief requires energy, and there isn't any to spare. You tell yourself it was a mistake, a fluke, but you don't go near the woods anymore. And then, when it gets bad enough, the whispering starts, about people eating people. At first it's a story from far away, a town to the east, a road too dangerous to travel, a siege where everyone went mad. You want to believe it's just talk, just fear and rumour, but then it comes closer. A boy says he saw something in the forest, bones boiled clean. A woman swears she heard chewing from behind a boarded-up window. You tell yourself it's nonsense. You stop telling your children bedtime stories. You don't want them thinking about what hunger can do. But history remembers. And the truth is, it's not new. There are records written by monks, preserved in brittle parchment, describing years just like this. In Ireland, they spoke of parents eating their own young during the famines of the early centuries. In Constantinople, witnesses swore that during sieges, the scent of roasting meat came from houses where no livestock had ever lived. There's a chronicle from Syria that recounts people grinding up bones for soup. The words are distant, faded, almost mythic, until they're not. Until you realise you're living through the same chapter, just with fewer scribes and no parchment to preserve your shame. You still try to hold on to some kind of line. You don't speak to the family next door, but you leave a turnip on their step. You stop your son from stealing eggs from the coop that isn't yours. You help dig a grave for the old man who froze in his sleep, even though no one asked you to. But you know, deep down, that lines like these are temporary. They exist only as long as your body holds out, as long as your ribs don't start pressing too hard against your skin, as long as your hands don't start shaking from hunger. Trust is gone, not dramatically, not shattered like glass, but dissolved like salt in water. Slowly, until nothing remains but a vague taste of what used to be. You look at your neighbours and no longer see friends or kin. You see mouths, you see hands, you see the future if you're unlucky. Every conversation is an assessment. Every gesture could be a threat. You don't tell anyone how much you have. You don't ask what they've lost. You nod and smile and keep your back to the wall. The worst part is how ordinary it starts to feel. How all of this, the theft, the silence, the fear, becomes background noise. You don't flinch at empty cradles anymore. You don't ask where the meat came from. You just eat when there's food. You just sleep. When it's safe, you just survive, one day at a time, hoping the weather breaks before your neighbours do. Now that you're all starving, filthy, and psychologically hollowed out, it's time for the next guest of honour. Plague. Because apparently, when the world collapses, it likes to do so in layers. Famine wasn't festive enough. Rot didn't quite complete the picture. And so, as the sky stays grey and the ground stays barren, something new begins to slither its way in from the east. A sickness no one understands, no one can stop, and everyone will learn to fear. Welcome to the plague of Justinian. It doesn't hit all at once. At first it's just rumours, stories from distant cities, something strange in the ports, fevers, swellings, people dropping in the streets. Constantinople hears about it before you do. Merchants speak in hushed tones, sailors disembark looking pale and hollow, and the markets start closing early. The city, already bloated with bodies, overrun with rats and stacked with years of human waste that has nowhere to go, becomes a perfect incubator. Add a few fleas, a few boats, a few bad weeks, and it spreads. From Egypt, from Syria, from the sea lanes that never truly stopped moving, even during the worst of the famine. And soon, it's everywhere. The thing about plague is that it doesn't need much help. It thrives in weakness, in filth, in overcrowded corners of a crumbling empire. And weakness is now the one resource your civilization has in abundance. Years of cold and starvation have worn everyone down. The poor are already starving. The rich are only slightly slower to realize that money doesn't buy immunity. People are still huddling indoors to escape the cold, sleeping close together, sharing firewood, food, parasites. The rats are everywhere, chewing through what's left of the grain stores. The fleas ride in quietly. And then a fever, a swelling, a corpse. You don't know what it's called yet. No one calls it plague at first. They call it the swelling sickness, or the purple death, or God's wrath. And for a while, it's mostly someone else's problem. The cities, the coasts, the people who live in palaces and marketplaces, not mud huts like yours. But then someone in your village starts coughing. Then another can't get out of bed. Then someone's neck balloons to the size of a melon, blackens and bursts. And suddenly, it's not far away anymore. You can't wash, you can't disinfect, you can't isolate. You barely have enough water to drink, let alone to scrub the walls or boil cloth. There's no concept of sanitation beyond the most basic superstition. And so when one person falls ill, it spreads. Fast, brutal, efficient. Entire families go down within days. You stop trying to count the sick and start counting the ones who still stand. That number gets smaller every morning. The irony is sharp enough to cut. After all the starvation, after all the freezing and rotting and praying, you'd think your reward for surviving this long would be not dying of disease. But that's not how this works. In fact, surviving the famine may have just made you more likely to fall. Your body is already worn down, your immune system feeble, your gut starved of nutrients, your skin cracked and thin. The plague likes its hosts weak, and that means it likes you just fine. Cities suffer the most. In Constantinople alone, they'll say the dead pile up so fast that carts can't keep pace. 10,000 people a day, according to some accounts, though numbers blur in tragedy. The emperor himself will fall ill. Monks will write about the bodies being tossed into mass graves like rubbish. Survivors will stop ringing bells because there are no more mourners left to hear them. It will keep coming in waves again and again for decades, not just in one place, but across the empire, across the world. No one is safe. No one is spared. Not the rich, not the holy, not you. Of course, no one understands the science. No one knows about Yersinia pestis. No one sees the fleas. They just see the symptoms, the swellings, the blackened skin, the bloody vomit. They think it's demons, or punishment, or corruption in the air. People light incense, burn herbs, seal doors. Some abandon the sick. Others try to pray it away. Nothing works. There are no treatments, only fear. The priests keep preaching. The healers keep guessing. You keep breathing carefully, like maybe that will help. It doesn't. The air feels heavier now. The silences are longer. You used to fear hunger. Now you fear your own breath. Every cough is a warning. Every sweat-soaked brow, a premonition. You stop hugging your child. You sleep farther apart. You wash your hands with ash, like that might change something. And the worst part, it's not even the final blow. It's just another burden stacked on top of the rest. The crops are still failing. The cold hasn't lifted. The sky is still a smear of mourning. And now, there's death in the air, silent, sudden and unstoppable. You keep going, because there's nothing else to do. But it's not really life anymore. Just waiting for something, anything, to stop happening. Eventually, you decide to leave. Not because you have a plan, not because you know where you're going, but because staying feels like waiting to be buried in your own home. You've watched too many faces go slack. You've buried too many bones in frozen earth. You've eaten too many meals that don't deserve the name. So you pack what little remains, a bundle of firewood, a rag of cheese, half a water skin, and a knife that isn't sharp anymore, and walk away from the life that's already half dead. The road is worse than you remember. Not broken, just forgotten. Once there were merchants, traders, messages passed from village to village, carried on tired horses by tired men. Now there's nothing. The milestones have tipped sideways, the bridges grown and lean. The inns are either abandoned or stripped bare, with fire pits dug through the floors. You meet others, of course, dozens, then hundreds, all walking in different directions, all looking for somewhere better. No one finds it. You pass through other villages that look just like yours, only rearranged. Different fences, different accents, same hunger. Some people wave you off, tell you to keep walking. Others say nothing, just watch with hard eyes and hands near weapons. You see carts stuck in the mud, with no one left to push them. You see houses burnt down, for reasons you don't ask about. You see children crying behind boarded up doors. You stop knocking, you learn to walk quietly. You learn not to look too long at anything. You thought you might find help. A monastery, maybe, or a wealthy estate with food to spare. But there is no aid. There are no soup kitchens, no refugee camps. The word refugee hasn't even been invented yet. You're just another wanderer in a sea of wandering mouths. The cities don't want you. The towns can't take you. The farms have nothing left to offer, even if they wanted to, which they don't. Because every stranger is a threat, another stomach, another hand reaching for what little remains. When people do take you in, it's usually with suspicion. A bed of hay in a shed, a crust of bread handed over, with a warning not to steal. You say thank you, you mean it. You sleep with one eye open anyway. Once a man offered you shelter in exchange for labour. You chopped wood all day. He fed you nothing. You left at dawn. Another time, a woman offered a bowl of soup that tasted like boiled weeds and regret. You still dream about it sometimes. The kindness, not the taste, but kindness is rare. More often it's a fight. Two villages arguing over who gets to fish a dying stream. A band of men with axes turning away travellers, with threats and curses. You see one group corner a family near a riverbank and take their boots, their packs, and their last piece of dried meat. They don't kill them. They don't have to. The river takes care of that later. You help bury the youngest child with your hands. because there was no time to find a shovel. People start forming groups, not for safety, but for strength. Little militias, old rivalries reborn. What began as survival becomes conquest in miniature. Someone raises a banner from a half-forgotten noble house. Someone else carves symbols into their shields. You hear the word bandit more often, but it doesn't mean what it used to. It just means hungry men who stopped pretending. You start to wonder whether the difference between a village and a raiding party is just whether they let you leave alive. And then there's the border disputes, if such a term even applies anymore. Old tribal lines flare up. Ethnic tensions that lay dormant during better years return like rot under floorboards. One kingdom blames another for the failed grain shipments. Another sends riders to seize a granary that no longer exists. You hear of raids. You hear of retaliations. You hear of warlords staking claims over piles of ash and calling them cities. You walk a little faster after that. You were never meant to be a refugee. You were supposed to be a farmer. You were supposed to live and die within walking distance of the same 3 wells. But now you've walked for weeks. Your feet are blistered and cracked. Your shoulders ache from carrying a pack with nothing in it. You've eaten weeds. You've drunk from streams that smell like rust. You've stared at the same grey sky in 5 different provinces. And you're no closer to salvation than when you started. Eventually, you stop. Not because you find somewhere good, just because you're too tired to keep looking. You settle near a stream, or in an abandoned barn, or with a group of strangers who stopped asking names. You tell yourself you'll build something here, grow something, start again. But the ground is still frozen. The clouds still haven't broken. And now, instead of being one hungry family in your own village, you're one among hundreds, displaced, nameless, and just as doomed. The roads are still there, technically. You can trace their bones through the muck, old Roman stonework half buried in weeds, ruts worn deep by cartwheels that haven't turned in years. But no one travels them now. There's no point. The markets are empty. The merchants are gone. The only thing moving across the empire is cold wind and old news. Trade hasn't just slowed, it's collapsed. No grain coming from Egypt, no wine from Gaul, no silk from the east, no salt from the coast. The lifelines of civilization have frayed, then snapped, and now the world bleeds in silence. In better times, you might have lived your life without thinking about trade. Food came from the local fields, clothes from local hands, but the salt in your stew, the tin in your tools, the coins in your pouch, those came from somewhere else, a vast network, humming quietly behind the scenes. Now that it's gone, you feel the emptiness in everything. No one sells anything new. No one repairs what's broken. You haven't seen a real bar of soap in months. You'd kill for olive oil, not because it's fancy, but because it reminds you of a world where things still worked. Cities shrink without trade, ports decay. The docks that once rang with noise and labour are now quiet, masts rotting in place, warehouses empty but for rats and wind. Inland, caravans stop arriving. The merchants who once brought exotic goods now bring stories of failed harvests, bandits, and plague, or they don't arrive at all. You stop asking when the next shipment is due. You already know the answer. There isn't one. Governments begin to unravel. Local governors who once collected taxes in grain or coin now show up with empty carts and empty hands. What's left to collect? The fields are dead, the livestock eaten, the people dying. Even the soldiers have begun to look ragged, their boots splitting, their weapons rusting. Some stop enforcing laws altogether. Others enforce them too hard, squeezing blood from what little stone remains. It doesn't matter. You can't govern ruins. Even Rome, the symbol of continuity, feels tired. The old administrative machine still grinds forward, decrees, reforms, ceremonial titles, but there's no weight behind it anymore. The empire is a skeleton, dressed up in imperial robes and pretending to walk. Borders blur, Territories shift hands without battles. Whole regions fall silent, not from rebellion, but from exhaustion. You hear of places where no messenger has returned for years, and no one expects one to. The scribes still write for a while, but there's less to record. Fewer laws, fewer shipments, fewer births. The ink dries on dusty scrolls that no one will read. Some monasteries keep copying old texts, trying to preserve the memory of a world that's fading fast. Others stop bothering. The monks are hungry, same as everyone else. Some abandon scripture for farming. Others starve over half-translated pages of Cicero and Galen. There's no glory in dying surrounded by forgotten words, but some still do it, out of duty, or delusion, or because it's the only thing left they know how to do. Libraries suffer quietly. No flames, no drama, just neglect. Roofs leak, mice chew through binding. Damp pages curl in on themselves and crumble. Scrolls meant to last centuries dissolve into mulch on shelves no one visits. The people who once kept knowledge alive, the scribes, the clerks, the stewards, die or flee or simply lose the will to continue. You start to hear stories about old books being used to start fires, not because anyone hated the knowledge, but because they hated being cold more. And still, people pretend things are holding together. A travelling official passes through your area and reads a proclamation from the emperor. You don't know who the emperor is anymore. You haven't seen a coin with his face on it in years, but you nod along anyway, like it matters. Like the empire still has hands that reach this far. It's a ritual now, hollow but familiar. The illusion of order maintained just long enough to keep people from noticing the truth. The world that once existed isn't dying. It's already dead. It just hasn't been buried yet. You used to believe that civilization was permanent. Stone roads, written laws, trained armies, but now you see how fragile it really was. How much of it depended on sunlight and weather and stomachs that weren't empty. And when those things failed, everything else followed. Not with a crash, but with a slow, weary shrug. The collapse isn't loud, it's quiet, administrative, boring. 1,000 small failures stacked on top of each other until nothing works and no one remembers how it ever did. And you just keep going. You still pay your taxes when someone with a sword demands it. You still listen to the priests, even if their voices shake. You still plant seeds in frozen soil and wait for letters from cities that no longer send them. Because that's what people do, even in the wreckage. They pretend things might return to normal, even if deep down they already know. There's no normal left to return to. You stop wondering what's happening elsewhere. You stop wondering what month it is. Not because you don't care, but because it no longer seems to matter. The outside world, the towns, the cities, the ports and far-off kingdoms, fades like a dream you barely remember. For all you know, they've crumbled entirely. Maybe Constantinople is ashes. Maybe Gaul fell into the sea. Maybe the rest of the world kept going without you. And you're just too small, too cold, and too far away to notice. But you don't think about it much anymore. You can't afford to. The messengers stopped coming seasons ago. First the riders, then the carts, then the traders who still tried, long after there was anything worth trading. The roads are too dangerous now, or too empty. Bandits, sickness, starvation. Take your pick. Even when someone does wander through, they rarely bring news, just stories. Half-remembered names of places you've never been. Claims of miracles or famines or distant wars that sound more like folk tales than fact. You nod politely when they speak. You stop listening by the third sentence. Your world used to stretch beyond the village, not far, but farther than now. You used to know what was happening 3 towns over. You used to hear about harvests in the south, festivals up a river, weddings and executions, and the price of salt in a city you'd never seen. But that's over. Now your world is the length of your daily walk, the edge of the nearest woods, the handful of people who still have the strength to talk. You see the same faces every day, hear the same tired complaints, tend the same useless patch of ground. Even that feels like too much some days. You've stopped marking the calendar. You used to scratch the days into a bit of wood, tracking moon cycles, estimating seasons. You stopped after you realised you'd miscounted by almost 2 weeks, and no one had noticed. The sky gives you no clues. The trees seem confused. You're fairly sure it's spring again, but it could just as easily be another cruel trick of the cold. People don't talk about dates anymore. They talk about before the last freeze or after Marta's boy died, as if time itself collapsed alongside the roads. What little information does trickle in arrives warped, bloated with fear and guesswork. A peddler claims he passed through a town where everyone was dancing themselves to death. A travelling priest says the sun is coming back soon because he saw a flock of birds flying north. A hunter insists he heard the voice of a saint in the woods. You don't believe any of it, but you don't challenge it either. Truth is too heavy now, and you're too tired to carry it. So instead, the old stories come back. Not scripture, not history, the older ones, the ones that live in corners and shadows and the spaces between facts. A woman with red eyes seen in the fog, a cursed well that boils in winter, a wolf that walks upright and steals children who complain too loudly. You laugh when you hear them, but not for long, not too loud, because everyone knows someone who saw something, and no one wants to risk being wrong. You find yourself repeating fragments, sayings your grandmother used, charms, warnings, useless things that sound like wisdom because they're old and rhythmic and no one has anything better. Don't sweep after dark. Don't sing during a storm. Never leave bread upside down. You don't remember why these mattered, but you follow them anyway. You need rules, even stupid ones, to hang on to. They make the grey days feel slightly more structured. They give you the illusion that choices still matter. Children grow up in this fog of unknowing. They ask fewer questions now. They play less. They grow up faster, or maybe just smaller. Some of them never learn the names of cities that once sent wagons full of goods through your village. Some don't know what gold looks like. Some don't understand what you mean when you mention the sea. They've never seen more than a few miles in any direction, and they never will. Their world is this: the fire, the hut, the woods, the grey sky. And that is all. Even your memory starts to betray you. You try to picture the world as it was, but it comes back in fragments. A market stall, a river, the smell of warm bread, the sound of coins. You can't remember if it was a real place or a story someone told you. Sometimes you dream of cities that might not have existed. You wake up with names on your tongue that dissolve like smoke. You write them down, and later you can't read your own handwriting. You wonder if you're forgetting on purpose. And so the world shrinks, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually. You stop looking out and start looking down, at the path between your door and the firewood pile, at your own hands, at the dirt. You stop asking big questions, you stop dreaming of rescue. You start thinking like a mouse in a dark hole, scrounging crumbs and hoping the cat has died. You survive, but you no longer know what that word means. Because surviving implies there's still a world out there, and you're starting to suspect that world might already be gone. You're still breathing, but that doesn't mean you made it. Survival was never a finish line. Not in this world. It's just a continuation of everything that already broke. You exist now, like a candle, with no wick left, barely glowing out of habit. You wake up each morning not with purpose, but with momentum, because stopping still feels harder than continuing. And when people say you're lucky to have lasted this long, you don't respond. You don't feel lucky. You don't feel much of anything anymore. Everyone you loved is either dead or numb. Your wife no longer sings. Your brother stopped talking months ago, except to mutter in his sleep. Your neighbour, the one who used to tell stories by the fire, stares through people now. The children play silently, or not at all. You think about the ones who didn't make it, the old, the sick, the ones who gave up, and you try not to picture their faces. But you do. They come back to you at night, not as ghosts, but as unfinished thoughts. You wonder if they're better off. You can't remember what warm food tastes like. Not real warmth, not something scorched over a smoky fire or half-boiled in a cracked pot, but the kind that fills you from the inside, the kind that made you sigh after eating. That kind is gone. Your meals now are more like tasks, half-frozen tubers, sour broth, something vaguely chewable that used to be a root. You eat because you have to, because your stomach still grumbles, even if the rest of you gave up weeks ago. You try to remember summer. Not just the word, but the feeling. Bare skin, green shade, dust rising from a dry path. Bees, the sound of birds in heat-thick air. But it's faded, distant. The seasons have all blurred into one another, one long grey smear of wet earth and numb fingers. You know summer must still exist somewhere. You just don't believe it will ever come back here. Not to you, not in your lifetime, maybe not ever. Hope was the last thing you let go of. You kept it hidden long after you stopped speaking its name. You thought maybe, if you didn't say it out loud, it wouldn't notice you still had it. But it noticed, and now it's gone too, not in some dramatic moment, not in tears or fury, just gone. Like breath on a mirror, vanishing before you realise it was even there. You stopped making plans. You stopped planting things. You stopped pausing at the window to look for sunlight. You just stopped. And then one morning, you don't wake up. No cries, no fever, no blood. Just the quiet ending that comes when the body runs out of excuses. Your fingers are curled around a blanket that no longer keeps out the cold. Your breath slows. Your bones ache, but distantly, like they've grown tired of trying to get your attention. Outside, the fog has settled low again, pressing close to the earth, as if the sky is trying to touch the ground one final time. You close your eyes and the world does not protest. It lets you go without ceremony. No one sees you die. No one is watching. Your hut stays still. Your last thought is not of heaven or warmth or regret. It's something smaller. The sound of running water, maybe, or the taste of an apple from a tree that hasn't borne fruit in years. You are not remembered in songs. You were not chosen. You were not spared. You just held on longer than some, and then you didn't. And the world continues, exactly as broken as before. Later, someone finds your body. They bury you without much trouble. The ground is soft from thawing frost. A few words are said, or maybe not. People move on. There's always more work to do. Someone takes your blanket. Someone else takes your knife. No one cries. No one marks your name in a book. There is no book. Books don't survive where people stop writing. And this is what the end looks like, when it isn't heroic or tragic or grand, when it isn't a climax, just an exhale, a slow slipping into the fog of everything that's been lost already. The world doesn't pause, it doesn't notice, because endings like yours are no longer exceptional. They are the new normal, one more breath snuffed out in a season that forgot how to change. Eventually, the sun came back. Not all at once, not in a blaze of redemption, but in cautious degrees. A little more light by mid-morning, a little less grey in the clouds. The haze that had pressed down on the world like a burial shroud began to lift. The air warmed just enough to coax green from the branches. Somewhere, snowmelt ran in clear lines through old irrigation ditches. Somewhere, birds returned to a tree that had survived more winters than it should have. But none of it mattered to you. You were already gone. By the time the light returned, your bones had already settled beneath the soil, or been scattered by the wind, or stacked anonymously in a shallow grave with a dozen others. There were no witnesses to your final breath, no monument to mark your time on earth. Just silence. The same silence that swallowed most of a generation. The same silence that made room for something new to grow. Not in celebration, but by default. Because when enough people vanish, nature reclaims what they used to need. The survivors didn't cheer. They barely noticed at first. The thaw didn't mean safety. The sunlight didn't mean plenty. The land remained damaged, thin, hesitant. The trees took years to regrow. The fields came back patchy and stunted. But the survivors, what few there were, planted anyway. Dug, sowed, hoped. Their hands were no less cracked than yours had been. Their children no less hungry. But the frost no longer crept into every season, and that was enough to keep going. Life resumed in slow, uncertain increments. Eventually, trade routes reopened, not as they had been, but in new, smaller forms. Local exchanges, meagre caravans. Salt passed from one coast to another. Grain carried on someone's back. Monks resumed copying books, though many of the old libraries were gone. Cities rebuilt or didn't. Villages grew where others had died. Languages shifted. Names changed. But no one said yours aloud. You had left no mark deep enough to withstand the weather. You weren't a name worth writing down. You weren't a figure worth mythologizing. You hadn't led an army or carved a prayer into stone. You had planted, waited, starved. And when it became clear that you would not live to see the return of the sun, you lay down and let the world continue without you, quietly, without anger, without glory. And in that, you were like so many others. There would be records eventually, a few scattered lines in dusty chronicles. They would call it a year without sun, or the famine of grey sky, or the long darkness. They would describe the dimming, the cold, the plague. A few scholars centuries later would argue over the cause. A volcano in Iceland. No, a tropical eruption. Maybe more than one. None of them would know your name. None would think to ask. The records don't care about the individuals who starved quietly in the corners of empire. And the world that emerged after would tell itself stories to make sense of it all. Tales of divine punishment, of trials endured by the righteous, of strength forged through suffering. The children of survivors would be told that those who lived were meant to, that their ancestors were strong. That hardship builds character. No one would tell them the truth, that you died not because you were weak, but because you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and no amount of strength can feed a stomach when the ground won't grow food. Your death was one of thousands, tens of thousands, millions in time, and most of those were like yours, small, undramatic, unnoticed. You didn't fall in battle or perish in defiance. You simply stopped. Like a candle flickering out in a room, no one entered again. History does not pause for those deaths. It continues. It rebuilds. It rewrites. Eventually, your descendants, if any exist, will forget there was ever a famine. A few scraps of what happened will survive, buried in ice cores and tree rings, and records copied by tired hands in cold monasteries. Scholars will one day call the year 536 the worst year to be alive, but they will say it from a distance. They will speak of climate anomalies and volcanic winters and mass mortality. They will never know what it was like to walk under a sunless sky, to eat bark bread beside a silent fire, to bury someone and forget what day it was. They will never know you, because you were not special, you were not chosen, you were not saved, and when the sun returned, it returned for someone else. That brings us to the end of tonight's story. Not of a disaster survived, but of a life unrecorded, and a world that kept moving after it forgot you. If you're still awake, thank you for drifting into the dark with me, and for remembering that history is mostly made of people who didn't make it. If you'd like early access to future stories, ad-free audio of these episodes, or just want to support the show, you'll find a Patreon link in the description. You can also like, subscribe, or leave a comment with other parts of history you'd like to see covered. And if you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps others find these stories. Sleep well.